If you thought a regular morning at a public bus stop couldn't change history, you clearly haven't met Mrs. Ernestine Holloway. Mrs. Ernestine, 74 years old, white-haired, wearing reading glasses, thicker than any health insurance policy, just wanted to visit the nearest bakery and buy her favorite loaf of raisin bread. Simple enough, right? But life rarely lets elderly black women walk peacefully under the sun without turning it into a case of national security concern. That day, she wore a wrinkled floral dress she lovingly called her high-end market outfit and carried a handbag as large as a grandmother's heart filled with candy for the grandkids. She stepped out of her home with one goal: get the bread, avoid any trouble, and make it back home to rewatch an old Matlock episode. But as she set foot at bus stop 5A at the corner of Maple and 14th, a place where even pigeons had more freedom to gather than people of color, things started to veer off course. The atmosphere was calm at first. Light sun, a breeze gently teasing her hair, well, her wig, to be precise. It shifted slightly leftward in an unwanted wind effect as she adjusted it and reached for a mint candy before she could even unwrap it. Enter stage a stark white police officer with a beard and a hat radiating authority but devoid of compassion. Sergeant Roy Beckett. Sergeant Beckett looked at her as if she were a suspicious package in a Cold War-era airport. No greeting, no, "Ma'am, do you need help?" He walked straight up and asked in a tone reserved for fugitives on the run, "What's in your bag?" "Yes, you heard that right. A 74-year-old black woman was interrogated for carrying a handbag. She hadn't said a word, hadn't broken a single law, and yet she was instantly seen as a potential threat to public safety. Because clearly, in a world soaked in bias, sometimes skin color is the only reason needed. And so what began as an innocent bread run turned into a confrontation. No one expected a moment that made an entire block stop and watch. If you thought people needed a good reason to call the cops, welcome to America, where a black grandmother holding a tote bag can be treated like she's about to bomb a bus stop. Sergeant Roy Beckett, a living embodiment of protect and serve, unless you don't look like his son, stood with hands on hips staring at Mrs. Ernestine as if she were a bank robber fresh off an episode of America's Most Wanted. "I'm requesting you open your bag for inspection," Beckett said, his hand resting lightly on his gun, as if this 74-year-old woman might whip out a rubber slingshot in retaliation. Mrs. Ernestine looked up from the iron bench at the bus stop, raising her eyes to the tall officer with an expression equal parts weary and selectively disdainful, a skill honed from 7 decades. In a society that loves random checks with highly predictable racial patterns, "Son," she said with a voice as gentle as it was biting, "all I've got in this bag is a wallet, some candy tissues, and a steadily shrinking faith in the American legal system." Beckett furrowed his brow, probably unaccustomed to being met with articulate sass from the elderly, especially black ones. He gestured to a younger officer, Lieutenant Miller, to assist, because, apparently, inspecting a senior citizen's purse now required 2 armed men. Lieutenant Miller, fresh from the academy and still believing in the chapter titled "How to Be a Decent Cop," approached carefully. "We just need to take a quick look inside your bag, ma'am. It's standard procedure." Ernestine sighed and opened the bag slowly as if unveiling buried treasure. Inside an old leather wallet, a few crumpled receipts, peppermint candies, a paperback titled "Why I Still Believe in Human Dignity, Even Today," and a tub of Vaseline lotion. Beckett looked at everything, then froze. No bomb, no drugs, nothing but living proof that what he'd just done was wrong, and no training had ever taught him how to handle that kind of truth. Around them, passengers began to gather. A young man live-streamed the scene on TikTok with the caption, "Grandma gets searched for, wearing the wrong skin tone." A young mother whispered to her child, "See that baby? You need to learn how to stand tall like her." And Mrs. Ernestine just sat there, slowly unwrapping a peppermint candy and popping it into her mouth. "So, does anyone want to ask me where I'm headed now?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or do I have to file a report every time I want to buy a loaf of bread?" At that moment, the situation was no longer about checking a handbag. It was a test of conscience, and many people were clearly failing. If anyone thought Mrs. Ernestine didn't have someone in her corner, they had clearly never heard the name Earl Judge B. Whitaker, her legendary husband, a retired federal judge and current master of the art of silencing a whole bus station with a single look. When Mrs. Ernestine flipped open her phone, a beat-up old flip phone with a signal stronger than the police chief's moral compass, she pressed just one number. No long explanation, just 3 words. "It's happening again." 10 minutes later, right as Beckett was lecturing Miller about how that funky shrimp paste smell could qualify as biological weaponry, Earl appeared. No sirens, no security detail, no shouting. Just an old black man in a brown wool coat, plaid scarf, and holding a polished ebony cane, less for walking, more for making a statement. He walked slow but steady, like every step was handing down a silent verdict. Beckett looked up and froze. Not out of fear, but out of sheer uncertainty about how to act when the subject of interest suddenly embraces someone his boss's boss's boss once shook hands with at a federal summit. "My wife's being detained again for the crime of sitting still at a bus stop." Earl said, his voice warm, but with more force than a cabinet meeting. Beckett stammered, "We were just following protocol, sir. You touched my wife's bag without a warrant, without probable cause. And now you're clinging to protocol like it's your last life raft." "The issue isn't the bag. The issue is the way you looked at a 74-year-old black woman like she was born to be suspicious." Lieutenant Miller looked like he was seriously reconsidering a transfer to a bakery. Beckett started staring down at his shoes, as if realizing for the first time that they hadn't looked anyone in the eye all day. But Earl wasn't finished. "You know," Earl said, voice steady, "people can lose their driver's license for running a red light. And yet today, you've all blown past the limit of human dignity. And there wasn't even a light on." Around them, people had started clapping. Not the cheering kind you hear in action movies, but the soft, deliberate kind meant to say, "I saw that Mrs. Ernestine remained seated, still sucking on her peppermint, still looking at Earl. The man she knew could make an entire system question itself with nothing but a glance." Just as Earl Whitaker was restoring order at the bus stop with the tone of a man who once made a city mayor cry during a public hearing, a man stepped out of the operations office wearing a lanyard that read, "Area Commander." His name was Horace Dumont. He looked like he had just walked out of a city council meeting with a hot Starbucks in hand, and a firm belief that America moved past racism back when Obama was elected. He adjusted his tie and approached his voice smoother than brown sugar syrup. "Good morning, sir, ma'am. I'm Commander Dumont. Seems like there's been a bit of a misunderstanding this morning." Earl raised his hand, a gesture that instantly turned the greeting into a politely forced silence. "No need for introductions. I assume you're the one directly responsible here." Dumont hesitated slightly, then nodded. "Good Earl," said, his voice not loud, but carrying the weight of a declaration. "Because my wife, a 74-year-old black citizen, was stopped, searched, questioned, and treated like a suspect, just for sitting and waiting for a bus. And I'm not saying it seems like it happened. I'm saying it did happen. Dumont began to sweat, not from the weather, but because public opinion now had its camera on record, phones were raised. A teenager was live streaming. A man in a t-shirt that read "The Rosa Parks Memoir" was nodding furiously from the other side of the station. Dumont fumbled. "We meant no disrespect. No disrespect. You called the police to search an old woman eating cashews. Let me ask you, Mr. Dumont, when was the last time your officers checked the tote bag of a white woman in yoga pants, waiting at a bus stop with a $12 smoothie?" Dumont choked. An employee behind him tried to disappear into the wall. Beckett stared down at the tip of his boot. For the 7th time in 2 minutes, Earl continued, "You folks don't have a problem with the bag. You have a problem with the person carrying it." He turned to look at his wife. Mrs. Ernestine was trimming her nails. As calm as someone waiting their turn at a hair salon, maybe because she knew the best speech was happening right here. And the scriptwriter was her husband. Earl turned back. "I don't want a voucher. I don't need free bus fare. I want a formal memo stating that what just happened was a serious violation of civil rights. And if I don't receive it within 48 hours, I give you my word. This entire conversation will be on every evening news show from MSNBC to the YouTube channel of a kid named Dr. Dragged You." Dumont stayed silent, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew whatever he said was being recorded. Mrs. Ernestine finally stood up, adjusted her scarf, and winked at Earl. "Love, I think the bus is here. The entire bus stop," applauded. Not because Mrs. Ernestine was a hero, but because she didn't need to be one to deserve respect. Just as Earl and Mrs. Ernestine stepped away from the bus stop slowly, with dignity, as if they'd just won a political tennis match. Beckett turned to Dumont and mumbled, "So, what do I report to HQ, Dumont? Now looking like his tie was strangling him." "Hist report. Whatever you want. Just make sure the hashtag, Who's Mrs. Ernestine, doesn't trend on Twitter." Spoiler, it already did. Online, a short video clip showing Mrs. Ernestine standing like a statue of serenity while police questioned her, and her husband fired off constitutional zingers, went viral, surpassing 1 million views in just 4 hours. The caption read simply, "She was just eating cashews." But America choked. TikTok has a new trend. Young people are now filming themselves wearing sunglasses, carrying woven totes, pretending to peel cashews, and whispering, "Don't make me call Earl over here." Twitter didn't miss the chance to mock the situation, either. TSA stops an old lady eating cashews, afraid she's hiding a vanilla-scented bomb. Police apologize for mistaking Mrs. Ernestine for a legally informed individual. Under those posts, there are hundreds of comments from people who've experienced similar situations. A black doctor shared that he was stopped at a flight gate because he didn't look like someone flying business class. An elderly woman said she was asked to open her purse just because she looked a bit too confident. Shopping at the grocery store. As for the authorities, the bus stop released a press statement at 5 p.m. with a title as long-winded as an excuse. "We value all passengers and are reviewing our safety protocols to avoid any unwanted misunderstanding involving an elderly passenger at facility no fear." Netizens weren't having it. One young person replied bluntly, "Read 50 words and still didn't see the word sorry." And what about Mrs. Ernestine? She was sitting on her sofa at home, holding a cup of chamomile tea, a light blanket over her legs. The TV broadcasted the news Story shaking up social media. Justice for Ernestine, she shrugged. Not bad for a morning waiting at a bus stop. Huh, Earl? Checking the city council meeting schedule. Just chuckled, and we still haven't had breakfast. Right after Mrs. Ernestine and Mr. Earl left the bus stop like two stars walking off the red carpet after the Oscars, with no need for many words. Their glances did all the talking. A series of short videos started flooding TikTok, Instagram Reels, and Twitter. Sorry. The video was titled, "Black Grandma Gets Frisked by Cops for Eating Cashews. Just wait till her husband shows up at Justice for Granny." In under 3 hours, the video hit trending status. Netizens dissected every detail like the FBI decoding a national security broadcast, zoom in on Beckett's eyes at minute 47. He realizes he messed up and is planning to quit and become a barista. That nod from Mr. Earl at 1:13 peak power. No mic needed. On Reddit, a thread titled "The Legend of Earl, the Equalizer," Whitaker, who writes his dialogue, garnered 14,000 upvotes in 6 hours. Meanwhile, on Twitter, Cha resects the hashtags snack while black and transit. Justice began to spread rapidly. The Black Twitter community, known for being sharp, fast, and fierce, declared this wasn't a minor incident. It was a living example of systemic racism seasoned with the bland disrespect of local authorities. One user summed it up even more bluntly. "Dear America, my grandma was eating cashews at a bus stop, not storming the Pentagon. Why y'all acting like that?" Media outlets started calling CNN, MSNBC even. Trevor Noah, despite having left his show, reposted the video with the caption, "Mr. Earl is the reason I still believe in black elders in America." And while the internet was exploding back at that bus stop, Officer Beckett, the original cop, was reassigned to parking lot safety supervisor. Yes, you guessed it. No one knows what that job actually entails. Maybe not even him. Officer Derek D. Block, Hanover nicknamed by locals, because whenever he showed up, the whole block got shut down. Stood stiff like a bronze statue repeating the same empty phrase. "We were just following protocol, ma'am. No need to blow this out of proportion." Ms. Evelyn stood her ground, her heels pressing into the concrete like she was challenging gravity itself. Her eyes locked on him, unblinking, unwavering protocol. She growled, her voice raspy like thunder forged from 72 years of standing tall. "I was out buying seedless grapes and a box of Lipton tea, and I got stopped for walking too confidently. So what should I hunch down and apologize every time I walk through this automatic door to match your damn protocol?" A few nearby passengers struggled not to laugh. A child sitting beside his mother whispered, "Mom, that lady looks like Grandma, but Grandma doesn't wear heart-shaped sunglasses." Ms. Evelyn didn't interrupt. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an old flip phone, the kind that made a sharp click every time it closed, like sealing someone's fate, and dialed a number. No need for names, no need for explanations. She simply said 2 words. "He's here." On the other end of the line, a man whose voice alone could make 3 generations of police chiefs reach for antidepressants, replied, "On my way." And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the only moment all day that Officer Hanover slightly lowered his head, not out of respect, but because of a sudden chill down his spine. A few onlookers began live streaming. A TikTok user named @Truth with Trudy posted, "Something juicy going down at Platform 4. An old lady is staring a cop straight back into his childhood." From a distance, the sound of an engine started echoing. Not the wail of police sirens, but the deep, polished purr of a vintage Bentley. The kind of car that only shows up to sign termination papers, rewrite protocols, or end dynasties. Ms. Evelyn smoothed the edge of her scarf, then turned to the officer with a half-smile. "Young man, I can forgive ignorance, but I will never forgive arrogance, wrapped in a badge." Then she sat back down, poured water from a thermos that read, "Black Grandmas Matter," and took a slow sip like she was tasting justice, stewed over 72 long years. The battle hadn't begun, but the crowd had already picked their side. Officer Robbins was no longer smiling. The whole platform had gone silent, save for the steady click of high heels approaching. Mr. Elmer, husband of Ms. Bernice, closing in with the quiet intensity of a preacher entering a courtroom. He carried a worn Bible bag, wore a Bluetooth headset, and looked forward like he was about to deliver a guest lecture at Harvard. "Excuse me," his voice rang out, calm but absolute. "Who just put my wife in handcuffs?" Officer Robbins stammered, I didn't realize she was." "Oh, and if she wasn't someone important, what then?" "Throw her in cuffs and post it on TikTok for content, Mr. Elmer's squinted tone dripping with sarcasm, sharp enough to make 3 bystanders choke on their coffee. A younger officer nearby started to speak, but Elmer just lifted one earbud and shook his head. "I don't need an explanation. I need a report and an apology." The air began to shift. By minute 2, bystanders had already pulled out their phones to record, and now every eye was locked on Officer Robbins, who was blushing like a kid called to the blackboard, unprepared. Ms. Bernice stood up, smoothed her dress, her expression as calm as if she just stood from a pew at church. "He doesn't owe me an apology. He owes it to the federal government," she said softly. Officer Robbins turned pale. "Which government, ma'am?" "The one I used to advise on immigration policy. I testified before the Senate in 1988. "And you, sir? Who do you testify to?" "TikTok." Soft chuckles broke out in the crowd. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a reversal, and Ms. Bernice, a silver-haired black woman who'd just been handcuffed for sitting too properly at a train station, was now commanding the stage. When Ms. Ophelia and Mr. Carl walked out of the police station with an official paper confirming she had committed no disturbance, no offense, except perhaps daring to wear a bold purple dress, the story should have ended. But in a city where bias is served with your morning coffee, this was just the thawing point on social media. The video of Mr. Carl confronting the officer spread faster than gossip in a beauty salon. One clip showing the elderly black gentleman dressed like he was attending a chamber concert, pointing at the "Protect and Serve" sign and asking, "Is that a slogan or a threat?" became a national meme. Another clip captured Sergeant Darren Flinch fumbling to explain why Ms. Ophelia was detained despite having no specific reason other than she exhibited uncooperative behavior. The internet didn't miss a beat. One top comment read, "Uncooperative or unsubmissive. 2 very different things, unless you're still thinking in slave terms." Local newspapers, usually reserved for stories about cats stuck in trees, couldn't ignore this. The next morning's headline screamed, "Black elderly woman detained for dressing too well." In public civil rights groups took notice. A young Latino lawyer emailed Carl, "If you need representation, I'll do it pro bono. I'm literally going to law school to sue people like Darren." Meanwhile, the police department held an internal meeting not to learn from mistakes, but to brainstorm how to dodge responsibility. They drafted a press release that used 3 lines to apologize and 4 full paragraphs to explain that We are committed to fair justice enforcement, but reserve the right to respond when an individual appears to deviate from typical patterns of conduct in public spaces. That line set the internet ablaze. One anonymous account, possibly the girl who filmed the video, posted, "If wearing a purple dress, a floral hat, and reciting poetry in a public square is wrong, I don't want to be right." Ms. Ophelia's story didn't stop at being profiled. It exposed the normalization of dismissing elderly black people, those who once sang in civil rights marches now being told to stay quiet and move along. And what about Ophelia? After she got home, she sipped a cup of ginger tea opened. Spotify played, Aretha Franklin, then texted Carl, "Let's go to the city council tomorrow afternoon. I plan to speak, but this time, bring the wide brim hat, and you wear the blue suit, just to annoy them a little more." Carl replied, "Absolutely, and I'm bringing the mic." Miss Loretta didn't win her case with tears. She won with steadfastness with each slow but unwavering step, by making an entire system take a long, hard look in the mirror. On the day of the final hearing, the press arrived like it was a fair. Lawyers sipped coffee, reporters adjusted their mics, and Ms. Loretta, she brought exactly 3 things: her reading glasses, a hand-crocheted tote bag, and a handwritten petition requesting Officer Jake re-enroll in Being Human 101. The judge looked at her for a moment, then asked, "Ms. Loretta, would you like to address the court?" She nodded, stood up, and smoothed her dress like she was about to lead Bible study. "Your Honor," she began, "I don't want the officer to be fired. I want him to understand that just because he wears a uniform and I wear a floral dress doesn't mean he is more dignified than I am." The courtroom held its breath. Then she pointed at Officer Jake. "You don't need to know who I am, but you must know that I am a person." The defendant's lawyers squirmed. The judge leaned back, exhaling in a way that said, "This won't be a quiet day." In the end, the court ruled violation of civil rights, abuse of authority through arbitrary checks, and defamation of an elderly citizen's dignity. Jake was suspended for 6 months and required to attend a human rights training course designed by Ms. Loretta herself. The class was titled, "Politeness Doesn't Kill Seriously." The following week, Mrs. Loretta was invited to speak at the State University. She began with, "If an old lady carrying a bunch of bananas can stand up to injustice, what excuse do you young folks have to stay silent?" The crowd erupted in applause. The press dubbed her a social phenomenon who doesn't need social media. Jake, after completing the course, issuing a public apology, and sending Ms. Loretta a fruit basket, finally learned his lesson in humility. He said, "I've never been schooled by someone 50 years older than me without them ever raising their voice." And as for Ms. Loretta, she just smiled. "I don't need power. I just want to see justice." Remember the elderly, but the story continues, because every time someone like Ms. Loretta stands up, society takes a step forward.